actually, to the question about a constitutional convention, because an important question always comes as well, who would be the delegates to such a convention? And most often the people who ask that question really have a terrifying image in mind of who the delegates would likely to be. And usually this comes because they believe that the delegates would be elected and that the elections would simply be an exponential version of everything we don't like about the current American political process, including the role of money, single issue candidates, and the like. This comes back to the point about whether we have a requisite faith in popular judgment. And, I confess I'd be willing to go with a national jury. I don't think that the issues we're discussing this evening are rocket science. You really don't need to have a graduate degree in order to understand some of the basic dilemmas and presented by different forms of political institutions. But I think that they don't engage in these arguments more than they do because of a view that nothing can be done. Whereas if we did have this kind of citizen jury national convention, though ideally it would begin in Maryland and showing the possibility at states, I'm sure that C-SPAN would cover it. I'm sure it would be the ultimate in political reality television. And I don't mean that snidely at all, but you would discover people whom you identify with. It is a vision of how political change might take place, but quite frankly, I know that it sounds very utopian or quixotic or flaky because most people aren't willing to engage in the first step, which is a discussion like the one we're having this evening. I'm sure this sounds very, very bizarre. It's safe to say that nobody in 1787 had the slightest conception of what the American presidency would turn into, for better and for worse. But, this is one reason why I describe myself, I hope sincerely, as not engaging in founder bashing, and that doesn't mean lack of sympathy with Daniel Shays, but it does mean that I don't blame them for not being alive in 2010. They were responding to the problems of their own time and in many ways did a very impressive job. In some ways not so impressive. But that's not really the point. The point is our own political world. And again, if I can conclude by citing scripture, it's James Madison himself who concludes the 14th Federalist paper very, very eloquently by saying that we always ought to be willing to learn the lessons of experience, by saying that the greatness of the United States is precisely that it was willing to engage in a revolution in 1776 and to embark into a new world that had not ever been thoroughly theorized or certainly thoroughly enacted. And they did it anyway. And for that, I honor them, genuinely. But what I find bizarre and objectionable is that we've ended up engaging in a form of ancestor worship of people, one of whose central messages is that we shouldn't engage in ancestor worship. We should think for ourselves and try to design institutions adequate for our time. And that's where I am genuinely and deeply willing to embrace James Madison, even if in many, many ways I think that the Constitution he helped to impose on us is dangerously dysfunctional in 2010.